UConn.
Yeah, and this looks like another deck that's kind of built to function very well versus Grim Patron, maybe even versus Druid, and they have a pretty darn good opening hand with the Twilight Drake. Always happy to see those powerful 4-drops from the Handlock's perspective. And Penn State, they pick up an Execute that can help them deal with some of these threats. But really the big story here is that Grim Patron oftentimes has trouble pushing through a big wall that Handlock puts up. So they're going to be looking to draw a lot of extra cards, set up one of those big positions where a Frothing Berserker can deliver more damage than the Handlock can actually deal with. You know, they spend a lot of time life tapping and trading for those extra cards. You're looking for that one big burst turn, but you don't always find it. It's usually you got to have Executes.
Yeah, and I've seen two different ways to go about this matchup for Warrior players. One is to just try and be super aggressive early and kill the Warlock before they can even put up a wall. Or two is to just draw a crap ton early and just say, you know what, we're just going to try and get a big Emperor Thaurissan turn and burst you even through a big wall.
Yeah, and it looks like Penn State is going to favor the slower game plan. They deliberately don't attack here with his Armorsmith. They want to stay out of Molten Giant range about as long as they possibly can. But something to take note of is that their hand is not equipped to draw a bunch of cards right now. They actually have no card draw mechanics. No slams, no loot hoarders, no Nourish Inventors, no battle rages, not even a shield block in this hand. They pick up a Death Spite so they can start chewing through this Twilight Drake. You're going to lose an Armorsmith in the process, though, and they have a lot of just utility cards in their hand. This game plan is going to be difficult for them to navigate through. It's going to take some work, but certainly not completely out of the question yet. UConn doesn't have the strongest hand right now.
Yeah, the Armorsmith isn't usually that big of a deal if you're the Patron Warrior player in this matchup, because by the time the Warlock player gets enough big threats on the board to kill you, you probably have lost the game anyway, even if you did have 10 more armor, because you're not going to be able to get through all those threats.
And so this kind of hand now, we've actually gotten to a spot where I feel like Penn State has a pretty darn good chance to win this. You know, an Emperor Thaurissan would just almost complete this hand at this point. But once they hit that 8 to 9 mana range, you're looking at Warsong Commander, Frothing Berserker with a Whirlwind, Execute, the Death Spite for the second Whirlwind. There's a lot of action in this hand. The one thing they need, though, is time. Yeah. And so if UConn can put together a force here that's going to start pressuring Penn State, that's really where they have to worry.
Yeah, UConn's hand is not really meant for this task at the moment, though, because they don't have any more threats. Outside of that Twilight Drake, the next big thing they have is Emperor Thaurissan, and that's not coming for another turn. Double anti-Keelbot in the hand, that's not what they want.
So this kind of situation, I look at it for UConn, and I wonder, you know, how valuable are these anti-Keelbots? Are we really going to get a ton of use out of them? And how much more am I going to get from life tapping at this point? There's not really a lot of 3-mana cards this deck is going to use. So they're going to favor Big Game Hunter in this spot just to get a little bit of action on board and start pressuring them. You know, this Grim Patron deck doesn't have a ton of big minions, if any, that you can ever target with Big Game Hunter. This is basically a 3-mana 4/2, and you can see right now they're already struggling about how to allocate their resources. And all three of them in the discussion, taking their time, they want to find a way to start making sure that this warrior has to do something.
Yeah, and Penn State is going to be very happy if they just see on turn 5 with 9 cards or 10 cards in hand from the Handlock player, just a BGH come out or an anti-Healbot. That is the dream scenario of your Patron Warrior in this matchup.
Yeah, I think they're even contemplating coupling the Big Game Hunter with a Dark Bomb. And again, it's really just about pressure at this point. If the warrior never has to do anything, they get these big explosive turns with Frothing Berserker. It's when you pressure them is when they start to fall behind a little bit. Maybe have to use Whirlwinds or Inner Rages to shore things up. And now finally a Battle Rage in hand, but that Armorsmith is gone. And so really only one card to be drawn off of this. And gosh, I mean, I take a look and I wonder, do you just need to get to that Emperor Thaurissan now?
Yeah, or even just more forms of card draw. Even if you just Battle Rage into like a Slam or Battle Rage into maybe like an Acolyte of Pain, you just need a little bit more cycle. You need a couple more pieces and then into Emperor Thaurissan. I mean, their hand is pretty good. They only need a couple more pieces in order to sort of make it complete. Especially now they realize UConn's hand is pretty terrible.
Yeah, they've gotten a pretty open statement at this point too from UConn. You know, given that the Big Game Hunter was just a play, they know there's not Sludge Belcher, they know there's not Mountain Giant. Very likely, I think, to be maybe a 6-drop in this hand, but it could just be backed by a bunch of removal. You know, this deck has a lot of utility spells in it as well. And so second Inner Rage, not quite what they're looking for, but their hand is starting to become very dangerous from the damage output perspective.
Oh yeah.
And we're closing in on those turns. I mean, you take a look at next turn alone, they're going to have 10, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, almost 20 points of damage available.
And another pretty dead draw for UConn. They do have the Emperor Thorsan, but putting reductions on cards that are situational sometimes doesn't even make a difference. Later on, when you do draw threats, having the utility cards reduced can make it so you have easier turns to navigate. You can fit in an extra Sun Fury Protector or Dark Bomb in a lot of cases, but right now, it's not doing too much other than putting a big 5/5 body on the board.
Yeah, and that's part of what their goal is too, is again just get the pressure out. I mean, now they have 13 damage on board, so potentially threatening lethal if you're in Penn State's shoes right now. But the one thing they don't have up is a taunt, and adding that extra minion to the board, did that give them the reach that maybe they needed? It looks like they had this counted ahead of time. They're just going to play this Acolyte of Pain very quickly and start moving more into the card draw side of things.
Yeah, they still need a couple more pieces in order to make it to enough damage. I think they were probably close to about 5 or so damage off from being able to kill there with 5 targets on the board.
So Penn State looks like they want to take a very defensive route here. These Whirlwind effects will replace themselves because they're damaging an Acolyte of Pain, but you use up your Whirlwinds, you use up your Death Spite, throw an Interage in the mix, you've lost a lot of your utility that couples with that Frothing Berserker. So even though they're drawing a lot of cards, they're using up a lot of their utility now. So to see how they're going to make up for that deficit, something interesting to see, and you can tell that they're deliberating about this very hard right now, because this is a spot where the damage is starting to really add up for UConn. Maybe this is just something they got to do in fear of those big ranges from UConn, and Harrison Jones isn't going to be any help. Warlocks don't really run any weapons, TJ.
Yeah, Jiraxis is just about the only one, but this matchup doesn't usually get to the point where Jiraxis becomes super relevant. And a lot of times, if this is Demon Hand Lock, which with the Doom Guard draw, it looks to be, and of course Mal'Ganis in the hand, Jiraxis sometimes just comes out on its own with a Void Caller, so Harrison Jones probably just going to be played as a 5/4 body, maybe even as early as next turn.
So Penn State, again, they've stayed off this aggression, but they just use a lot of their utility. So that reach that they had last turn, now it's dwindled a little bit. So we're back to trying to figure out exactly how we move into those big turns. And talking about big turns, when you got Mountain Giant and you got action behind it, it's a pretty darn big one.
Oh, yeah. Both execute still in the hand for Penn State, though. They're not too afraid of that. The thing is, they have to activate that, so they're going to have to use another Inner Rage or try to draw into a Whirlwind effect or tank 8 damage with the Fire War Axe in order to remove that.
Yeah, 8 damage might be a little bit too much at this point, and that's really the big benefit that Handlock has in this matchup versus traditional Control Warrior decks, is that Control Warrior is going to have big game hunters, they're going to have shield slams in it. Grim Patron Warrior pretty much only has Execute because everything else is dedicated to making sure you get those big damage turns.
Yeah.
Yeah, and now a really tough spot for Penn State. And just again, they have ways to answer this, but now look at how much of the utility has been lost.
Yeah, they need a Whirlwind effect now. Both Frothing Berserkers picked up, but now they need Emperor Thorsan plus a Whirlwind effect in order to start pushing for that lethal. And even though they eliminated a lot of the pressure, UConn's got threats for days, at least somewhere in the deck, and Dr. Boom's pretty good pickup.
Yeah, that's one of those scary threats against this deck always. You know, the Boom bots, they do enable Grim Patrons with those Warsong Commanders, but their Death Rattles can always throw a wrench in those plans. So it's a dangerous proposition kind of for both sides. In UConn, they're hoping they get the right hits with the Boom bots, but in Penn State's side, they're hoping that they just make more Grim Patrons. Yeah. So very difficult turns now for both players. I mean, up until this point, Penn State's really been the one with all the decisions to make. But now suddenly UConn, 10 cards in their hand, 8 mana available. Where do they go?
It's really tough. Really tough. And they also have to be thinking of, like, what cards could Penn State possibly have in their hand?
And that's a big one, too. I mean, you've just seen them use a lot of utility, and they used it pretty liberally, too. So they might be reading in this situation that Penn State has more utility left in their hand, considering that they were so, I don't want to say aggressive with it, but so willing to use so much of it. Wow, and Sable Ghoul picked up. I mean, this hand continues to get scarier, but now, again, the missing piece here is Emperor Thorsan.
Indeed.
There's too much mana worth of stuff to play. And for Penn State, this is a great spot where you could potentially go for Warsong Commander and Grim Patron, but now you have those 2 Frothing Berserkers that don't have that charge effect because Warsong Commander is going to be gone.
And UConn hasn't tapped as much. They tapped 3 times this game plus a hit from the Armor Smith, so they're still sitting at 23 health, which is not enough or not low enough for Penn State to just push through without reductions from Emperor Thorsan. It's hard to fit in Whirlwind effects that come from Unstable Ghouls without Emperor reduction because you have to factor in Warsong Commander plus Unstable Ghoul already is 5 mana. So you can fit in maybe a Grim Patron or a Frothing Berserker, but definitely not both, and definitely not multiples.
Well, it looks like they're going for the Grim Patron turn, TJ.
Here we go.
So we're going to have to find out where these boombots are landing.
It's going to be a big deal. Oh, no.
Oh, my goodness. Penn State says they've had enough after that one. They scoop it up after a bad boombot.
Wow, that is... I was actually